Adorite here, and you are listening to part 7, chapter 2 of The Land Chooses Its Heroes. This chapter is called Breaking Dwarven Blocks. Alright people, I'll see you at the end. When the force of the Echo River took hold, all hands were back on deck. It became very important that the sails stayed down and that the boat didn't hit anything, because at their current speed it would cause massive damage. Wakini took the helm of the Harlequin, standing on a crate so that he could rise above the wheel. Canydell couldn't tell exactly what he was doing, but it felt very important and dangerous. Pisces was out on deck. She woke up with everyone else when the river rocked the boat forward. "It won't be long until we see something," said the woman with the red-tipped hair. The woman wasn't wrong. It didn't take long before they saw in the distance a blockade. There were several nets that hung low. Thick ropes affixed to posts that sank deep under the river, designed to snag boats at the hull, not the deck. If a boat went at the speed they were going, and the net hit the mast, it could potentially rip it from the floor. These nets didn't stretch the length of the river, but were spread out. It seemed as if they could be potentially removed. On the shore were lookout towers that sparked to life in the form of a fiery beacon of flame. A chain reaction happened in the darkness, and orange dots of light began to appear along the shore. "I think these nets were meant for us to stop," said Ebo. "Yeah, I get that, but I'm curious to see what happens if we push our luck a bit," said Wakini, commanding the wheel with an impish devil-may-care grin. The gnome spun the wheel and laughed with reckless abandon. The lanky minotaur ran to Wakini's side with urgency. "Sir, do you think maybe we should slow down? We were meant to stop at the checkpoints, remember?" the bull-headed man said softly over the roaring rush of river. "Yeah, we were supposed to, and maybe we will. But if they didn't want me to push through, why would they make all these nets so fun to dodge?" the gnome said, laughing, spinning the wheel, eluding nets. Ebo smiled and nodded his head in agreement. Arkin folded his arms and sat down, watching the boat nimbly sway from the clutches of nets, attempting to snag it from the sea like fishermen may. Coming up fast was a wooden structure, a wooden bridge that appeared to span all the way across the river, along with longer nets to slow boats. "I believe that all the other nets were to slow you so you wouldn't crash into the bridge at full speed," said Ebo. Wakini scoffed. "It's too late for all that now, huh?" Canydell looked at the ad hoc bridge, which definitely was a wartime construct, something made quickly for the sake of control, not built to last. It was wooden and well constructed, but sparsely constructed. There were burning braziers lit that forewarned the standing army of their coming. Canydell could see men and dwarves forming on the bridge like ants going to war from the distance they were. They all noticed a giant moving onto the bridge. The creature was at least 20 feet tall, with a mohawk on top of his head and tattoos covering where his hair wasn't. Other soldiers affixed the mammoth creature with ropes and winches for reasons Canydell had yet to understand. Wakini decided to aim for the smaller nets to slow the Harlequin, now that he was seeing the kind of opposition he was facing and the potential danger to the boat's integrity. Wakini saw that there were beams that would prevent the passing of bigger boats, but a huge door in the center of this structure. He couldn't tell how it opened yet, but he assumed it was a preventative measure so that boats they found undesirable would need to stay on their side of the river. The gnome broke through one of the nets meant to slow him, and had one more before he'd either tear his mast up and potentially break his hull on the bridge. He aimed for the net closest to the door. The group all collectively held their breath, but Wakini spun the wheel at the last possible moment and slowed itself to a halt. The crew moved fast and dropped anchor, 2 anchors in fact. It was just a smart idea to have more than one anchor if you planned on traversing any part of this river. The boat stopped more or less, though the violent sway of the current rocked and shifted their positions wildly. A dwarf in mobile green leather appeared on the bridge, backed by similarly equipped dwarves, humans, and sprinkles of other races behind him. The dwarf wore his hair in a mohawk that slumped on one side of his face, with rune-like tattoos over his skull. The giant, which Ebo thought could possibly be a storm giant judging from his size and demeanor, rode the background, with his arms folded defensively.
I am General Ignatius Grumpkin, and I have found myself in command of this outpost. Do you consent to be boarded?
Said the general with a loud, commanding voice that was amplified by the use of a conic device. And what if I do not consent? Wakini yelled at the top of his lungs to raise his voice over the roaring river.
Then you are enemies of General Gramblin Maddox, and you will be put down as such,
said the dwarf with the weight of militaristic fact. Not much of a choice, General, yelled Wakini.
But still a choice,
the dwarf said back as if he didn't mind it going either way. Casually, Arkin moved the material away from his coat so that he may get a better pull of his pistols if it did in fact go that way. Well, none of us have anything to hide here, said Wakini, who stuck to the plan. The dwarven general nodded. He began the process of inspection, which at this point to him and his men was streamlined and mundane. From the bridge, several men shot cables onto the deck of the Harlequin. Once secured, a handful of dwarfs and men slid down, General Grumpkin included. The dwarfs surveyed the ship and crew in silent judgment, which heightened the mood of extreme paranoia. Having done this thousands of times, the general elicited no overt emotions. Your business for leaving the Lorelei region, said the general to Wakini, who stood at the height of approximately 4'5" because he was standing on a box. We are going to enter him in Molaran to perform, said Wakini, leaving out any of the sass or cheeky behavior. Looking at this battle-torn dwarf, the gnome didn't think any such levity would be met with the good-natured intent he would have meant it. Yes, it does look the part, the dwarf said after staring at the whimsically painted red and white boat. Do you have anything official to prove your claim? General Grumpkin demanded. Wakini reached into his breast pocket and pulled the forgery. Granted, the chances of the general knowing the leader of Interim or the counselor of Keen were slim, but if and he did, this was when the validity of the forgery would come into play. It does, in fact, seem legit, but unfortunately, as of now, we are allowing no passage. Your boat will be detained unless you wish to make a vital cargo run to Molaran for us, said the general.
Excuse me, General,
said Ebo, who cut in.
I know Gramblin Maddox. Perhaps there's a way for you to send word to him so that we might pass.
The general looked over Ebo hard, judging him.
So, you're a bard? No, of course not. I'm the prop master, said Ebo.
Arkin took a look at what exactly was preventing the gates from opening and assessing if it was something he could do to make it open. They had a giant, men, and dwarves, but all they needed was a moment when the gates opened and the Echo River would do the rest. They would be gone before reinforcements could arrive. Arkin didn't quite see what was making the doors open, but he did in fact see Canydell somehow on the bridge. The dogfolk gunslinger looked to his right to see Canydell was still on the bridge. He smiled. His double was nosing around while it appeared as if he was still on the deck. Or he was nosing around and his double was on the deck. Arkin knew well that Canydell could swap his position with his other self. The dogfolk nodded to his friend on the deck, and he did a knowing nod back to him. This was the Canydell he remembered, willing to risk it all to continue on the path despite the obstacles he faced, or perhaps because of the obstacles he faced. Ebo was still going on and on about his casual acquaintance with one of the biggest generals on Everin, which gave Arkin the distraction he needed when Canydell lit the fuse. Captain Wakini saw Arkin inching for his pistol, and he smirked slyly. Though he may have been an entertainer, he was a gambler before he was anything else. Though he didn't know exactly what was about to happen, a part of him knew that he had to be ready. The gnome locked eyes with Pisces, and with a few gestures of his hand, he spoke in thieves' cant, the rarely known silent language of thieves and cutthroats. It was more so encoded gestures with hidden meanings on top of words, or slight flourishes or inflections that made coordination and silence possible for the sake of running elaborate deceptions in plain sight. The captain told Pisces to make her way to the anchor and pull it up when the time came. She gestured back with fingers that trembled in fear, but she'd rather attempt to make a break for it than be herded to a detention camp for re-education. And on my mother's side, he used to play murder ball with my third cousin, Belton Block, said Ebo, who had, at this point, got General Ignatius to recall a few acquaintances of his own. You know, I knew the Block family. Were those the Blocks from Upper Occlusion? Said General Ignatius. It is! This was the moment that Canydell made his move. He switched places with his double and turned the massive wheel that held the gate fast. A handful of dwarves turned to look at him, but he couldn't stop now. He had committed to this action. Arkin saw Canydell's sign and was spurred into action. There were approximately 10 men and dwarves from the encampment on board, so he started with the closest to him. He had silently positioned himself next to this soldier, so when the time came, he could place his leg at the back of his knee and fling him over the side. He did this without hesitation. Though they were connected to a line that would reel them up, he was no longer on the ship. When Captain McKinney saw the gates open, he lunged towards one of the anchor mechanisms, as did Pisces. In one orchestrated maelstrom of action, it all went down almost simultaneously. The crew of bards and artists just dove to the ground, hoping for the best rather than being instantly cut down. Sure, they could act like they could fight, but that only went so far when the knives were out. The Harlequin was gripped in the violent grasp of the Echo River and pushed forward as a startled horse slapped into action. Ebo looked to General Ignatius with just as much surprise as he had, but when he saw the general go for his weapon, he went for his. Ebo cast a gust of wind and pushed the general nearly to the edge of the deck. Through the gale force, trickles of oil spewed from the wind like rain in a hurricane. The bald dwarf was just as surprised as the general when he slid the rest of the way off the deck. Ebo never knew exactly what was going to happen when he called to the faceless god, but fortunately, the die of fate rolled in his favor. After a moment, the festive boat slipped past the barricade, and all the soldiers that were tethered to the lines were yanked back all at once as marionettes. Canydell thought to put his double onto the boat and hop back on until he saw the war-torn storm giant's hand crackling with electrical energy. He redirected his clone to appear on the behemoth's face like a spider that had brazenly crawled to a place it should not. The giant flung an arc of lightning at the bow of the ship. It veered off course the moment he swatted the pest from his eye and singed the hull. He realized he was dealing with an illusion very quickly and refocused his attention to the fleeing ship. Canydell switched places with his double and attacked the oversized soldier. He could see the Harlequin moving rapidly away, and he immediately sent a double onto the deck. Arkin dove and rolled behind the mast. The errant lightning bolt streaked wildly, then the dogfolk craned his head to Canydell, who hadn't returned just yet. He saw his double appear on the ship. Even after years of adventuring together, he wasn't quite sure the distance that Canydell could travel, so he ran to the end of the ship as Canydell's image began to flicker and fade. Canydell saw his window closing, soldiers swarmed him tactically, and the giant reached his hand down to grab him. Canydell used that opportunity to hop down to the massive soldier's foot. He goaded him, he clung to him, and attempted to stick to him like glue. The giant swung his foot in a kicking motion, and that was all Canydell needed. He used the force of his thrust to propel himself over the bridge and out into the water. The forces of Grambling Maddox watched Canydell wink in midair for a moment before he faded out of existence. When Canydell switched places with his double, the force of the boat's violent movement sent him tumbling over the side. Suddenly, a hand caught him. Arkin grabbed him at the elbow and pulled him back to the safety of the boat. "Thanks," Canydell said to his friend. Arkin nodded. "I didn't think you had it in you. I wasn't sure I did either, but I wasn't willing to risk whatever it was they were planning." The echo's fury relented, and the current became slightly more manageable. They couldn't completely stop the boat because of the current, but if they didn't get off, they were sure to overshoot their intended location by days. Captain Wikindi opted to steer as closely to land as was prudent so that they could grapple off. The parting of ways was bittersweet. Even in their short travels, they had found friends aboard the Harlequin. Pisces opted to stay on the crew for a bit longer, though the Seekers continued on with the next leg of their mission. Before they made their harrowing hop to shore, Wikindi reminded them to say hi to his cousin Kip. When the Seekers touched land, they headed south for the gnomish village of Marilou. What's up, Adorai back in this piece. Chapter 2 is down, now look for Chapter 3. I don't know when it's coming out, so keep listening to the channel, or don't. Like or subscribe, or don't. But let me just remind your ass, you did listen to the whole damn thing. Might as well do one of those things. So we back to Clearview next week for a little bit. Don't know what's after that. From the god of games, I say, peace out.